Hello everyone, welcome to another learning session. Today, we are going to actually start learning about Azure Cloud. In the previous session titled Cloud Computing 101, we had learned about cloud computing in general, and whatever topics we learned in that particular session will be applicable to today as well as all of our future cloud sessions. In today's session, we will start by exploring about Azure accounts, how you can create Azure accounts, different types of Azure accounts, and most importantly, how you can practice Azure Cloud for free without an Azure account or without a credit card or any of those formalities. Then we will discuss about some of the core architectural concepts such as region pairs, availability zones, availability sets, and geographies. After that, we will learn about Azure resources. We will look into topics such as resource categories, resource examples, resource groups, resource tags, subscriptions, and management groups. We will also briefly look into RBAC roles and Azure AD roles, and we will be looking deeper into those topics in future identity and security sessions. Finally, we will go through some questions to check your understanding of Azure Cloud based on what you have learned today. So are you excited to start learning about Azure Cloud? Then let us get started. Azure Cloud 101. The prerequisite for today's session is the Cloud Computing 101 session. Detailed agenda for today. 1. Azure accounts, Azure account basics, how to create Azure accounts, different types of Azure accounts, and how to practice Azure for free with sandboxes. 2. Tools to connect with Azure, Azure Portal, Azure PowerShell, Azure Cloud Shell, and Azure CLI. 3. Architectural components, regions, availability zones, availability sets, and geographies. 4. Azure resources overview, resource categories, resource groups, subscriptions, management groups, and RBAC roles versus Azure AD roles. 5. Questions to check your understanding. I am Hartin Kanigutotu, a cloud architect and an author. For detailed introduction about me, you can watch the Cloud Computing 101 session. You can also read more about me from hartin.github.io. Let us start with Azure accounts. Let me ask you something. How many of you have created Azure accounts before? What happened when you create one? What all will Microsoft create and provide to you at minimum when you create an Azure account? I generally get answers as free trial subscription, tenant, Microsoft account. What do you think? Creating an Azure account means signing up for an Azure Cloud service. When you sign up for an Azure Cloud service, two things happen. 1. It will create an Azure AD tenant. 2. The user who signed up will be made a member of the global administrator role for that tenant. You may be asking yourself now, what is Azure AD? What is a tenant? And who is a global administrator? Azure AD stands for Azure Active Directory and is an identity and access management or IAM service for Microsoft Cloud services, including Azure Service, Microsoft Business Email, etc. If Azure AD is for all Microsoft Cloud services such as Azure, Business Email, etc., can I have same users in both? Answer is yes, as long as the tenant is same. For the same tenant, if you create users in Business Email, the same users will automatically be available in the Azure AD service within your Azure portal. Before understanding what an Azure AD tenant is, let me see if you know the meaning of tenant in real world. Hope you remember our house renting example from the Cloud Computing 101 session. What will you do if you are new to a city and need a house to stay? Most logical answer was to rent a house, right? Who is tenant here? You, who is staying on rent, or the landlord who gave the house to you for rent? You, right? The landlord gives his house for rent to a tenant, and tenant pays the monthly rent and any maintenance expenses, etc. With an Azure AD service, Microsoft provides an instance of the Azure AD service to organizations, and each of these instances are called a tenant. A tenant is also called a directory. After all, it is an instance of the Azure Active Directory, right? So each of these tenants are called as directories. From our house renting example, imagine that the landlord has an apartment complex and rents out apartments to different individuals. With the Azure AD service, Microsoft is similar to a landlord and gives Azure AD service to different organizations by creating a tenant for each of them. So the organizations will have a tenant or directory where they can manage the users, their groups, their company domain name, etc. For example, if the company domain name is trainso.com, it can create users as hartin@trainso.com, sneha@trainso.com, etc. Let me quickly take you through my personal account to understand tenant and directory better. My account details are shown on the top right corner. Below my email address representing my account, you can see something called as default directory. We learned earlier, right? When we sign up for Azure Cloud Service, it will create a tenant for us. The tenant is also called as a directory. When we create an Azure account as an individual, the directory that is created for us is called as the default directory. You can also create other directories and switch between them. You can go to the Azure Active Directory service page within your Azure portal by typing Azure Active Directory in the search box and going to the Azure Active Directory service. Here you can see users, groups, external entities, roles and administrators, and lot of other information. We also discussed about the global administrator role, right? So if you go to roles and administrators and search for a global administrator, you can find the details of a global administrator. That says he can manage all aspects of Azure AD and Microsoft services that use Azure AD identities. So if you go back to the default directory and if you click on manage tenants, you can see all the tenants you have, and then you can select one of them and then switch to that tenant. You can also click on create to create a new tenant. As you can see here, there are two types of tenants. One is Azure Active Directory and one is Azure Active Directory B2C. Azure Active Directory here is the normal Azure Active Directory that organizations use to manage its employees and even its Azure resources. Azure Active Directory B2C is a special tenant type that is used for managing your end users. For example, assume that Trainso Training Solutions Private Limited is developing a community portal where students can learn and interact with each other. Here, there are two types of actors. One, employees of Trainso who will be developing this application. Two, students who will be actually using this application. Assuming that the domain for the company is trainso.com, employees will also need to have emails of the form username at trainso.com. What will trainso.com do? They will create a regular Azure Active Directory tenant type, associate their custom domain to it, trainso.com, and add their employees as member users. They will be also developing and deploying the community portal application within subscriptions that are associated with this new regular Azure Active Directory. So what is Azure Active Directory B2C? Azure Active Directory B2C is for managing your end users, your students. Students will be the users of this community application, but unless they become an employee or an intern, they won't need access to Azure resources, right? They will also not need an email in the form username at trainso.com, right? So in summary, for the employees of an organization and for deploying Azure resources, you will use the regular Azure Active Directory tenant type. And for managing the end users of your application, you will be using Azure Active Directory B2C. We will see all these things, including Azure Active Directory, tenants, directories, and all in much more detail as part of identity and security sessions. Also, we had discussed earlier that different Microsoft services such as Azure, Business Email, etc. shares the same tenant for an organization, right? And because of that, if you create business emails such as courses at trainso.com or shared mailboxes like help@cloudrix.com in the Exchange or Office 365 portal, they will also come as users in your Azure AD service within your Azure portal. This is a corporate account with a CSP subscription. We will see what a CSP subscription is shortly. If you go to the Azure Active Directory service page and scroll down to custom domain names, you can see that there are some domains added here. You have buddytutorial.com, you have buddytutorial.onmicrosoft.com, you have cldrcks.onmicrosoft.com, and you also have cloudrix.com. Here, buddytutorial.onmicrosoft.com was the initial domain that was changed to cldrks.onmicrosoft.com. Along with that, we had also added and verified buddytutorial.com and cloudrix.com here. But in fact, cloudrix.com was actually added in your Exchange Admin Center. Now, if you scroll up and click on users, you can see many users here. And if you go to the Exchange Admin Center and then click on mailboxes, there also you can see the same users. So whenever a mailbox is created here, even if it is a shared mailbox, a corresponding user is created in the Azure portal also. In fact, it is not created again. They are just sharing the same set of users because they are both part of the same tenant. We will come back to this later. As we saw, there are two types of tenants, Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory B2C. Azure Active Directory tenant type is for the employees of a company and for managing its Azure resources. Azure Active Directory B2C is generally for the end users of a company's SaaS applications that are not specific to employees. Unlike the top level Azure Active Directory tenant type, Azure Active Directory B2C need to be created within a subscription. So let me quickly make it clear for you. So this is the page for creating a tenant, right? We have options to select either Azure Active Directory or Azure Active Directory B2C. If we select Azure Active Directory and click on next configuration, what all options we have? We have to give organization name. We have to give an initial domain name. We saw, right, something dot on Microsoft.com, and then we have to give a location. That is it. We can now review and create. Let us go to Azure AD B2C. If we select Azure AD B2C and then click on next configuration, you have the same options like the regular Azure AD, organization name, initial domain name, location, but you also have subscription. So here you have to select a subscription within your parent Azure Active Directory, which is a regular Azure Active Directory. You also need to select a resource group after that. While all your subscriptions are attached to a regular Azure Active Directory, your Azure Active Directory B2C comes attached to any of the subscriptions and resource groups. This is one difference between the regular Active Directory and Azure Active Directory B2C. So what are these subscriptions and resource groups? We will be learning about them later in today's session. I hope you have got a decent understanding of what Azure AD service is, what a tenant is, and what a global administrator role is, right? Tell me one thing. We signed up for Azure service and Microsoft created a tenant and made us a global administrator for that tenant. Can we start creating Azure resources now? No, we are not ready yet because we also need a subscription before we can create and manage Azure resources. Let us next see what a subscription is. An Azure subscription provides a billing boundary for your Azure account. What do you mean by billing boundary? It basically means that billing and invoices for your Azure resource usage is done to a subscription. That is why we cannot start using Azure resources without a subscription. Microsoft or any company will need to make sure customers are paying for their services, right? Different subscriptions can also have different payment mechanisms such as credit card, offline payment through CSP, etc. What is a CSP? CSP stands for Cloud Solutions Provider. A Microsoft CSP is an organization that acts as a Microsoft partner, develops deeper engagements with customers, and also resells Microsoft services to customers, mostly with some additional discounts than available with the default pay-as-you-go subscriptions in the portal. Training Solutions is also a Microsoft CSP partner. Subscriptions can also act as a permissions boundary for resources, as we will see later. Examples for subscriptions: dev subscription, prod subscription, test subscription, etc. These are the subscriptions I have in one of my account. First one is a dev test subscription, which means I can use it for dev or test without paying licensing costs of the Microsoft software, such as the Windows license. If you look into the pricing calculator, you can see that almost half of the cost of a virtual machine running Windows is the Windows licensing cost. So with a dev test subscription, you are getting that discounted. Since Windows is a Microsoft product, they can do this, but can other clouds do the same? This is one of the reasons it is always preferred to work on Azure Cloud when you have Microsoft licenses included, like Windows license, SQL Server license, etc. When you move to cloud, you can also get hybrid benefits for some of the Microsoft licenses that you already have in your on-premises. The second is a Visual Studio subscription. So when you buy a Visual Studio product, enterprise subscription or a professional subscription, you get an Azure subscription along with some free credits that you can utilize every month. And these subscription types are called as subscription offers. There are different types of subscriptions based on the offers you select while creating a subscription. And from the offers page, you can select one of the eligible subscriptions. So here I have already used the free trial offer, hence it is not eligible for me anymore. Azure free account or free trial offer. Most of the cloud providers provide you some kind of free trial to get started with that cloud. Azure provides you $200 credit for a month and also a set of services that are free for 12 months. There are also some services that are always free. You can just use a Google search, just search for Azure free account, go to the free account link. As you can see here, there are some services that are free for 12 months. There are some services that are free always. Let us explore some of the free services. As you can see here, there are some services like Azure Virtual Machines, Azure SQL Database, Azure Blob Service, Azure Cosmos DB, etc. that are free for 12 months up to the limits mentioned here. And also there are some services like Azure App Services, Azure Functions, Azure Event Grid that are always free, again up to the limits mentioned here. Tell me one thing. How many hours are there in a month? What is the maximum number of days a month can have? It is 31, right? And how many hours are there in a month with 31 days? It is 31 into 24, right? And it is 744. So the worst case is 744. And here with the VM tier, every month you will get 750 hours up to 12 months. This means that we can use that VM for free for the whole month, or we can use 2 VMs of that configuration for half a month or 4 VMs of that size for quarter of a month. In total, all those hours should be 750 per month. Even if the documentation said free for 12 months, it is not actually completely free. It is actually free for certain size or certain tiers. You can click on this link, see all free services, to see the services that are free. If you are a student in a university or a school, you may be eligible for an Azure for Students account, which will give you $100 Azure credit to start with and without the need for any credit card. Most of the subscription offers or types can be categorized based on the payment modes. Pay-as-you-go ones, like the regular pay-as-you-go or the DevTest subscription, will have an associated credit card for making payments. Here is a real-world example of a pay-as-you-go DevTest subscription. If you scroll down, you can see the payment methods under billing. If you click on it, you can see the default payment method section with your credit card details. The second category subscriptions are the ones with the free credits, like a free trial or a Visual Studio subscription. You can use them until credits are over, and then you'll have to either upgrade to a pay-as-you-go subscription, as in the case of free trial, or provide credit card details, as in the case of a Visual Studio subscription. Here is a real-world example for a Visual Studio subscription with free credits. As you can see, there is a message, you have 5333.94 credits remaining. With the subscriptions of this type, if you scroll down and click on the payment methods, there won't be a default payment method like we saw in the pay-as-you-go subscription. You will have to add a payment method if you want to use Azure services after your monthly free credits are over. You can add a payment method by clicking on add payment method here. Or if you scroll back to overview, you have a message here, click here to remove your spending limit. If I just want to utilize whatever credits are remaining, then I don't need to provide any credit card. Or I can click here to remove the spending limit. When you add a payment method, you have two options: remove spending limit indefinitely or remove spending limit for the current billing period. If you want to use more only for this current billing period, then you have to select this option. If you want to remove the spending limit for all the upcoming months, then you can choose the remove spending limit indefinitely option. Apart from pay-as-you-go and credit-based subscriptions, we can also have subscriptions with offline or alternative payment modes, such as the CSP subscription. Here is a real-world example of a subscription that was created through a CSP. With a CSP subscription, if you scroll down and check under the billing section, you won't find a payment method option at all. This is because here payment is done offline through your CSP provider. Your CSP provider might have a credit card payment option available, but from an Azure's perspective, it is offline. Even the enterprise subscriptions are similar to the CSP one that we saw here, but with an enterprise subscription, you get additional benefits and discounts in response to agreeing for a minimum spend in a year. But again, if you are not spending that much, you will be effectively losing money. In summary, we can have different types of subscriptions based on the payment methods. It could be offline, as in the case of a CSP-based subscription, or it could be credit-based, as in the case of a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, or it could be a pay-as-you-go subscription with a payment method attached to it. Let me ask you a question. If I am in free trial offer and use all of my credits before 30 days, will Azure start to charge me automatically? No. Free credit of $200 is given for the first month so that you can use it for experimenting with any services. Once your credit is over or you reach 30 days, your subscription will no longer work until you manually upgrade your subscription to a pay-as-you-go subscription. Another question. I created a new free tier account and got $200 credit for 30 days. The 30 days got over, but I have $50 credit left. What will happen? Free credits does not carry over. So you need to manually upgrade to a pay-as-you-go subscription. And until then, you will not be able to work with your Azure resources and you will not be charged also. You will be charged only after you manually upgrade to a pay-as-you-go subscription. Another question. After I upgrade to a pay-as-you-go subscription, in the second month, will I be charged for every usage thereafter? After you upgrade your subscription, you will be charged for any usage over and above the free usage amounts for a service. So the answer is no. You will not be charged for every usage. Remember that there are free usage quotas available for some services for a year and some services always, right? You will be charged only after you finish the free quota. Tenant and subscription. As we learned earlier, when we sign up for an Azure account, a tenant or directory is created. And before we need to start using Azure resources, we also need to create a subscription. These subscriptions have a trust relationship with our tenant. What does it mean? It means that these subscriptions rely on this tenant or directory, whatever you want you can call, to manage the users, do authentication, authorize security principles, etc. Authentication means checking the identity of a person and confirming that identity. Authorization means checking what all things that person can actually do and then allowing to do only those things. So we'll discuss about all this security stuff in detail in future identity and security sessions. If it is confusing in the beginning, just learn it as I say, especially when you are preparing for your fundamentals exams. A tenant can have multiple subscriptions. These subscriptions can have resources or even an Azure Ready B2C tenant, as we saw earlier. We can move a subscription from one tenant to another using the change directory option in the subscriptions page. Please note that the concept of tenant and subscriptions may be a bit confusing for people coming from other cloud providers such as AWS. For most of the other cloud providers, the account is the billing boundary. And if we need to group multiple billing boundaries within an organization, they use different mechanisms. For example, AWS has AWS organization service to manage multiple AWS accounts in an organization. So if you are coming from AWS background, your account there is similar to a subscription here. Let me ask you one question. Why will organizations need multiple subscriptions of Azure or multiple accounts in AWS? Can you tell some business cases? One reason could be to use different offers in Azure, as you saw earlier. It could be also for billing purposes, such as different departments can have different invoices and can make payments independently. It could also be for usage and permissions. For example, it is advised to have different subscriptions for prod and dev in case of Azure and different accounts in case of AWS. So we have learned quite about Azure accounts, free tier accounts, the concept of tenant and subscription. Now let us start getting our hands dirty working on Azure. But how can I start practicing Azure fundamentals hands-on for free without an Azure account? The solution is Microsoft Learn Sandbox. The Microsoft Learn Sandbox for Azure lets you perform specific Azure tasks for free without an Azure account. You just need a Microsoft account only. However, if you need to save your work, repurpose it for later use, or to extend it outside the boundaries of the given training exercise, you may run the lab in your own subscription if you prefer. So we have an exercise for exploring Sandbox and working with different ways to connect with Azure. So before going to exercise 1, let us explore the tools for interacting with Azure. There are primarily 4 ways in which you can interact with Azure: Azure Portal, Azure PowerShell, Azure Cloud Shell, and command line interface. Azure Portal, we have seen it in our demo. It is the web interface. Just type portal.azure.com and then you should be taken to that web interface that we saw in our demos, right? And if you are familiar with the PowerShell tool, then you can connect to Azure from PowerShell. Azure PowerShell is a collection of modules for managing Azure resources from PowerShell. We can install a PowerShell on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And then we can install the PowerShell module from within PowerShell. Just search in Google and then you should get these steps. And once you configure Azure PowerShell, we can run connect AC account to connect to our account. But we will soon see a way to work without installing anything on our local machine. Command line interface. People coming from a Linux background mostly prefer Bash or the command line form of interacting with Azure. The Azure command line interface or Azure CLI is a set of commands used to create and manage Azure resources. The Azure CLI is available to install in Windows, Mac OS, and Linux environments. It can also be run in a Docker container and Azure Cloud Shell. We can install and configure Azure CLI on command prompt on Windows and terminal on Mac or Linux. You can do a simple search in Google to find the steps to install Azure CLI. But again, for running CLI options also, Azure provides a way that doesn't require anything to be installed on your local machine. Azure Cloud Shell. Azure Cloud Shell is a browser-based shell that is hosted in the cloud and accessible from virtually anywhere. We can click on the Cloud Shell icon to open the Cloud Shell and then select either PowerShell or Bash to work on Cloud Shell. Sandbox exercise 1. Explore the Learn Sandbox. You need to activate the sandbox. You can use PowerShell, then shift to Bash, then shift to Azure interactive mode and also navigate the portal. I've given the link in this PPT here, but I will also show you how to reach the sandbox in case if you don't have access to the link. Just search for AZ900 in Google. Go to the learn.microsoft.com page for the same. You can read all about the certification here. Then scroll down. Within the self-paced learning section, you have different Azure paths. Learning path 1 is mostly theoretical. It does not have any labs. Go inside learning path 2, scroll down and find exercises. In this topic, there are 2 exercises. One, explore the learn sandbox that we should do now. And later, you also have an exercise to create an Azure resource. So once you go into this exercise, you will get an option similar to what you see here with a button activate sandbox. You should have already logged in with your Microsoft account. It is just an email. And then you can click on activate sandbox. It will verify permissions, create necessary resource groups, assign necessary roles, create necessary storage account, create the necessary file shares, and finally the sandbox is activated. Do practice every sandbox labs and do share updates or screenshots in our study group. Azure architectural components. In the session Cloud Computing 101, we had briefly learned about data centers and how they are related to cloud, right? Today, we will extend that knowledge and see how Azure manages its data centers using the architectural components such as geographies, regions, availability zones, availability sets, etc. Let us start with geographies. Geographies are discrete markets that preserve data residency and compliance boundaries. Examples include United States, India, etc. Geographies thus allow customers with specific data residency and compliance needs to keep their data and applications in proximity. For example, some countries may require that data of their citizens stay within that country itself. Geographies generally represent such compliance boundaries. Geographies typically contain 2 or more regions. So what are these regions? Regions are made up of 1 or more data centers in close proximity within a geography. Regions provide help in reducing customer latency. Tell me if you attended the Cloud Computing 101 session, which is better, low latency or high latency? Low latency, right? And latency is the time to get response for our request. So if the requester is closer to the server, latency will be lesser, right? Therefore, we can reduce latency by deploying resources to the regions that are closer to the customer. Regions also preserve data residency with a comprehensive compliance offering. Regions are within geographies and doesn't spread across geographies. Therefore, regions are within the compliance boundaries. For example, if India say that data of its citizens need to stay within India, we can deploy our resources to regions within the India geography. These are some of the examples of regions. The geography United States currently has the regions Central US, East US, East US 2, East US 3, North Central US, South Central US, West Central US, West US, West US 2, and West US 3. The geography India currently has the regions Central India, India South Central, South India. Recommended versus other regions. When you select a region in Azure portal, Azure categorizes them as recommended and other. Before creating a resource such as virtual machine in Azure, you need to select a region. And when you try to select a region, Azure categorizes those regions as recommended and other. Recommended regions support the broadest set of Azure products and will provide long-term capacity growth. For example, there is high probability that features such as availability zones will be present in a recommended region compared to an other region. We may, however, choose the other regions when we really need to target a particular geographic area. For example, if there is a compliance requirement to keep data in a geography and there are only other regions available in that geography, we will have to go with other regions, right? These are some of the current recommended and other regions I can see from the portal. I will show this quickly when we discuss about Azure resources and creation of virtual machines. Region pairs. Region pair is a set of 2 regions defined by Azure, and automatic replication of some Azure services happen between these regions. Regions in a region pair generally reside within the same geography except for Brazil, South, and Singapore. Having a region and its region pair within the same geography can help us with any data residency compliance laws. There is generally 300 miles of separation between regions in a region pair. This reduces the risk of data center getting affected by things such as natural calamities. Azure also provides prioritized region recovery in the event of outage for at least one region in the pair. Updates are also rolled out sequentially across regions in a pair to minimize downtime. So for example, here you can see that East US and West US are a region pair. So Azure will not roll out an update to both East US and West US at the same time. It will first do it to one of these and then it will do to the other one. Sovereign regions. Sovereign regions are instances of Azure that are isolated from the main instance of Azure. We may need to use a sovereign region for compliance or legal purposes. Examples include Azure Government, Azure China. Azure Government refers to a separate instance of Azure for the US government deployments. Azure Government is physically isolated from non-US government deployments. It meets the security and compliance needs of US federal agencies, state and local governments, and their solution providers. These data centers are operated by screened US personnel and include additional compliance certifications. Azure China features physically separated instances of Azure Cloud services operated by 21 ViaNet to ensure compliance by making all data stay within China. Microsoft is China's first foreign public cloud service provider in compliance with government regulations. Availability zones. An availability zone is a grouping of one or more data centers within a region to provide protection against downtime due to data center failure and ensure resiliency. Data centers in each availability zone is equipped with independent power, cooling, and networking infrastructure. Azure availability zones are connected by high-performance network with a round-trip latency of less than 2 milliseconds. They help data stay in sync. A minimum of 3 availability zones are present in all availability zone-enabled regions. Please note that all regions may not support availability zones. Availability zones are designed so that if one zone is affected, regional services, capacity, and high availability are supported by the remaining 2 zones. Let me ask you a question to check your understanding of availability zones based on what you had learned from the Cloud Computing 101 session. Availability zones are primarily responsible for which of the below? A. Fault tolerance. B. Disaster recovery. A. Fault tolerance. As we had learned in the Cloud Computing 101 session, fault tolerance is continuing to work in case of a failure, while disaster recovery is failing but recovering as soon as possible. We had also learned fault tolerance generally happens within a region and disaster recovery generally happens across a region. If availability zone is configured within a region, data is synced in real time across the availability zones in that region that is configured, making use of the high performance network with a very low latency of lesser than 2 milliseconds. Therefore, if one availability zone is affected, other availability zones can continue to support the hosted applications or services. Availability sets. Availability sets are a logical grouping of VMs and aims to provide resiliency within a data center. Each virtual machine in the availability set is assigned an update domain and a fault domain. Update domain and fault domain are two logical groupings. During a planned maintenance, only one update domain is rebooted at a time. Having virtual machines in multiple update domain groups will make sure that all virtual machines are not rebooted at the same time. Fault domains uses common set of hardware such as a rack within a data center and hence share a single point of failure. Having VMs in multiple fault domain groups will make sure it is resilient to server or rack failures. Fault domains will not help if the whole data center fail as availability sets are within a data center. For getting protection from data center failures, we need availability zones. Availability-based SLA examples from Azure. If you have a single VM with premium storage, Azure gives you 99.9% SLA. If you have 2 or more instances of VMs in availability sets, you get 99.95% SLA. Azure provides maintenance update guarantees and even protection from rack failures. A data center may have multiple racks of servers. For a virtual machine with availability zone, Azure provides you 99.99% SLA. In this case, you get protection from entire data center failures. Each availability zone will have at least one data center. And if you have 2 or more availability zones, and if one of the data center fail, it could be part of any of these availability zones. So that means one of the availability zone is gone, but we have one or more availability zone to handle the request, and hence your applications or services will continue to work. If you have configured automatic replication across regions, it can provide protection against regional failures. So fitting all things together, geographies contain regions, regions contain availability zones contain data centers, and data centers contain racks. Azure resources. Why did we learn about cloud computing? Why did we learn about Azure accounts and how to create them? Why did we learn about the architectural concepts such as regions, availability zones, etc.? We learned all those things because we wanted to create and manage different resources on Azure Cloud. Let us now start learning the fundamentals of Azure resources. Virtualized resources in Azure Cloud primarily include compute services, networking services, and storage services. We had learned about a computer and different parts of a computer in Cloud Computing 101, right? So those are the primary components that are virtualized. There will also be other managed services or products such as databases, analytical services, security services, migration services, etc. Azure resource examples. Compute services in Azure include virtual machines, app services, container services, Azure Kubernetes service, Azure Functions, Azure Virtual Desktop, etc. Azure networking services include Azure Virtual Network or VNet, Virtual Private Network Gateway or VPN, Azure Express Route, Azure DNS, etc. Azure storage services include container storage or blob storage, disk storage, Azure files, etc. There are also other managed services or products such as Azure AD, Azure SQL, Azure Migrate, Azure Databox, etc. Resource groups. A resource group is a container to manage resources as a single unit, like giving access to a group of resources. Whatever permissions given to a resource group is inherited by the resources that are part of that resource group. Some of the important properties of resource groups. Resources can exist in only one resource group at a time. Resources can be moved to different resource groups. A resource group can be created in a region and resources within it can exist in multiple regions. For example, the resource group may be created in East US, but it can have resources from West US or South India or Singapore or any other location. So why does a resource group need a region or location? A location or region for a resource group is specified mostly for storing metadata. What is metadata? Metadata is data about data. For example, what all resources are part of this resource group. Applications can utilize multiple resource groups. We had already learned about Azure subscriptions as a billing boundary, right? Azure subscriptions can also act as a permission boundary. What does it mean? We can have multiple resource groups within an Azure subscription, and we can set common permissions for those resource groups at the subscription level. And multiple subscriptions can be grouped together using a management group. Management groups group multiple Azure subscriptions, and we can set conditions or permissions that are common for all those subscriptions. We can nest management groups. That means we can have one management group inside another. That is not possible with subscriptions or resource groups. A management group tree can support up to 6 levels of depth. We can have 10,000 management groups in a single directory or a single tenant. This is a summary of access control hierarchy. Management groups contain subscriptions. Subscriptions contain resource groups. Resource groups contain resources. So you can set permissions at any of these levels. You can directly set permission at the resource level. You can set permission at the resource group level. In that case, all resources within that resource group will inherit that permission. You can set permissions at the subscription level. In that case, all resource groups within that subscription will inherit that permission. And in turn, all resources within all those resource groups will also inherit that permission. And finally, we can also set permissions at the management group level. Role-based access control or RBAC. We can set permissions for Azure resources at management group level or subscription level or resource group level or even at the resource level. And this is done through access control or IAM blade. You can click on the access control IAM blade like the one you see here, and then assign different roles to users, groups, etc. So assigning resource permissions through access control IAM is called as role-based access control or RBAC. RBAC roles examples include owner, contributor, reader, and then resource-specific permissions. An owner role has complete access to that permission boundary. It could be a resource group, or it could be a subscription, or it could be even management group. Complete permission means you can do anything and everything on that subscription or resource group or management group, and also you can give permissions to others. With a contributor role, you can do everything, but you cannot grant permissions to others. Then you have reader, which means you have read access to all the resources. Then you also have resource specific roles like ACR delete or ACR image signer, etc., etc. It is always advised to follow a least privilege policy, which means that do not give permissions that are not needed. Give only permissions that are really needed. And with RBAC, you can do that by assigning only roles specific to a resource that you need. Azure AD roles. Azure AD roles are used to manage access to users, groups, and other objects in your Azure Active Directory, while RBAC roles are used to manage access to resources. So within Azure AD, you have roles such as application administrator, application developer, global administrator, etc. We will learn more about authentication, authorization, Azure AD roles, and RBAC in identity and security sessions. The exercise 2 is all about creating an Azure resource, and that Azure resource is a virtual machine. So you may optionally watch the session Azure Virtual Machines 101 before doing that exercise. With a better knowledge of virtual machines, exercise 2 will be more fun to do. Exercise 2, complete the exercise titled Create Azure Resources from Microsoft Learn training website using Microsoft Learn Sandbox. You can follow the steps in exercise 2 from Microsoft Learn website and complete the exercise. But let me quickly show you how a virtual machine or a resource can be created. Search for virtual machine. Once you go to the virtual machine page, you can click on create and then click on Azure virtual machine. For creating resources in Azure, you need to first select a subscription and then you need to select a resource group. Then you need a name for your virtual machine and then you need to select the region. And here you can see that some of the regions come under the recommended heading and some regions come under the other heading. Then you have availability options. You can select availability zone or you can select availability set. We haven't discussed virtual machine scale set. And if you have selected availability set, then you will have to configure fault domains and update domains. You may refer the virtual machine session for that. Then you need to select a security type. Then you need to select an image for your virtual machine. Then you need to select the VM architecture for your virtual machine. Then you need to select whether you need to run the virtual machine using Azure Spot Discount. Azure Spot Discount offers unused Azure capacity at a discounted rate versus pay-as-you-go prices. Workloads should be tolerant to infrastructure loss as Azure may recall capacity for pay-as-you-go workloads. So basically, if somebody is not using a resource, Azure will give it to you for a much lower price. And if somebody come and ask for that resource for a higher price, Azure might take it from you and give it to that person. Then you have to select size. Then you have to select authentication type, whether it is SSH public key or password. So here we have selected a Linux operating system, right? Instead, if you had selected a Windows operating system, instead of SSH, it will be remote desktop protocol. So you can explore all these things and then create a virtual machine. Most importantly, you need to select a subscription, resource group, region, and the availability option. Availability zones or availability sets or virtual machine scale set or none. Please do the lab without fail and share the results in our study group chat. Some questions to check your understanding. I created a new free tier account and got $200 credit for 30 days. The 30 days got over, but I have $50 credit left. What will happen? A, I will be charged automatically. B, I won't be charged automatically until my $50 credit is over. C, none of the above. Answer is C, none of the above. Free credit does not carry over. You also need to manually upgrade to a pay-as-you-go subscription, and until then, you won't be charged. Question 2. Can we ensure that services running on a virtual machine are available if a single data center fails by deploying the virtual machines to 2 or more availability sets? No, availability sets are within a data center. It can protect you against a rack failure, but not against a data center failure. Question 3. Can we ensure that services running on a virtual machine are available if a single data center fails by deploying the virtual machines to 2 or more availability zones? Yes, each availability zone contains 1 or more data center. If we have deployed more than 1 availability zone and a data center in any of those availability zones fail, there will be at least 1 more data center serving our request. Question 4. Can we ensure that services running on virtual machines are available if a single data center fail by deploying the virtual machines to 2 or more regions? Yes, each region will contain 1 or more data center. If we have deployed to more than 1 region and a data center in any of those regions fail, there will be at least 1 more data center serving requests. Question 5. Can you use Azure availability zones to protect Azure virtual machines from a regional failure? Answer is no. Availability zones are within a region. Hence, if that whole region fail, availability zones won't be able to protect anything. Always remember the hierarchy. Geographies contain regions, regions contain availability zones, and availability zones contain data centers. Question 6. An Azure region is a collection of A. Resource groups, B. Subscriptions, C. Data centers that are connected by low latency links, D. Data centers that are connected by high latency links. C. Data centers that are connected by low latency links. That is how they keep in sync, right? 7. Order them correctly based on hierarchy. Subscriptions, management groups, resources, resource groups. The correct hierarchy is management groups contain subscriptions, subscriptions contain resource groups, and resource groups contain resources. Hope you learned something new today. Hope you also liked the questions that were asked at the end of the session to check your understanding of Azure Cloud. There are a lot more of similar questions in cloudrix.com portal at cloudrix.com/quizzes. Practice them at your free times and ask doubts in our study groups if you have any doubts. Let us all learn together and grow together in our study groups. Bye bye for now, and see you all in the next class.